Aditya, it felt like we're in a big boss house. I was like we were looking, where are you? So thanks for making it interesting. So yet another panel. I just did one before the lunch and I'm really enjoying this. And post lunch panels are actually interesting because you're relaxed. There's no need to rush, And when you have marketing leaders with iconic brands on this side, of course, it's gonna be an insightful, fun conversation. So the topic is, the sunrise sectors and how, despite even legacy brands at times, they need to have that cutting edge to stand apart, stand out of the clutter. And how do you do that? Let me start with you, Sumanji. You represent a brand that we have heard so much about. Some iconic names like Ruafza, Sinkara, or kitne sare, naam. Even a legacy brand at times needs to compete with challenger brands and innovate. You cannot rest on the laurels, as we say. How do you approach your marketing game plan to ensure that the brand stands on top of the recall factor? How does it work at Hamdard specifically?
Okay, thanks. Let me make an attempt to at least answer this. I think to begin with, any legacy brand has the advantage of two things. One, that it doesn't wait to be recognized, because I think the name of a brand is well known and most people know it. And in my case, if I were to talk about Hamdard, it's a 116-year-old company and it doesn't need any introduction. But one of the challenges that any legacy brand would really have to go through is the fact that you really can't be pushing the envelope on the brand in a jiffy, because this is a brand that has been built on goodwill, trust, a lot of love of the people. So, to walk the tightrope, one has to be very careful of what we are doing. So, looking at innovations, if you were to look at it, can we really change everything overnight and make it into a very yo brand? No, it doesn't work like that, because we are, end of the day, a medicine brand, and a medicine has to work keeping the medicine in mind, right? So there are certain challenges in that sense. So I think, one of the best examples that always come to my mind is that when the D2C brands came and usurped the market 2 years back or 3 years back, when they was becoming the game changers, I for a moment thought this is an opportunity for all of us to do something that has never been done before. Because, natural products are on the rise. People are crazy about it. The young generation is buying organic, natural products. And just when we thought, this is the time that you can pivot and change a lot of things, you realize that while you have the ingredients, you don't have the formats. So it's a very difficult thing to really overnight change a lot of things. And the other thing that I think hasn't worked in our favor is that Hamdard was not a digital company. It wasn't in the digital sphere at all until the lockdown happened. So if you really look at the journey of the brand in the e-commerce, M-Pharma space, it's only 2 years old. So in those sense, I think we have miles to go before we reach that game. But what works for us is this huge trust that people have, the love of the millions that we have, of the people who believe in the product. And they believe in the services of maybe the Unani clinics that we run and stuff like that. So I think each of these things have a lot of, history to it. There's a legacy to it. And one has to keep that going. So I think more we can talk once,
Absolutely.
all
No, I think
introduced.
also for a 100-year plus brand to be open to innovate, I think it's not an easy thing to do, right? There's so much to think about.
Right. And I think, while I don't know how many people know that in the Ayush system, we stand to represent the you. And Unani itself is different from Ayurveda because the method of treatment is so different. Same size doesn't fit all. The treatments are basis your majaz, your temperament. So if you don't understand that also, it doesn't work. So, it's only when you have experienced the journey with a Unani brand and a Unani clinic and a Unani Hakim that you start appreciating the point of difference. So, I can only say one thing, that in the Ayush system and in the Unani system, we stand tall because we are very differentiated. So, there's a very unique space that has been occupied, and that makes a lot of difference. Otherwise, if it's not in the DNA of a brand, you don't survive this many years.
Right. I want to make a small announcement at the back. Can we have lesser noise and that tinkering, because that background music here is kind of interfering. Gaurav, so I was looking at startups, and I mean, there's so much being talked about around startups. And when I analyze the startups, what do? They don't do earth-shattering things, but there's an approach. So entrepreneurship is an approach, okay, right? It's not just that you have to stay away from the clutter. That is a challenge. It's also for a new brand. Like Hamdard has a 100-year legacy. But for a new brand, making loyal customers is another challenge, right? Because loyalty is not, the way it used to be for brands. There's so many, consumers have the choice. How do you navigate the part of loyalty and building that recall that they come to you despite having so many other options like noise or, lesser than that?
Thanks, Ruhail. I think if you've been in a part of the startup ecosystem, your DNA changes. You start looking at things very, very differently. And you made a very pertinent point. It's not necessary that you're always like creating something which the world hasn't seen, or there's like a true, like an innovation that nobody had imagined about. You're looking at the industry, the consumer behavior, and finding a little need gap that the incumbents haven't been able to address very well. I always say that for any online brand that we see today, there was always an offline precedent. For a Policy Bazaar, there was an LIC agent. For a Make My Trip or an OTA, there was a travel agent selling tickets and all. But the distribution was hastened when the online or digitization happened. And this is where startups started to take root. They identified some need gaps, and then they obviously got the right product market fits. And with the VC capital that flowed in, you induced people for a new consumer behavior. But to answer the second part of your question, Ruhail, I'm like, maybe I'll just go back to my an earlier digital stint when we started off OLX in the country. I was the chief marketing officer of OLX, joined in 2013, started it off. And in a C2C marketplace business, loyalty was going to be the only reason because of which you could actually make money. If you didn't have 70 to 80% market share, there was no way you're gonna make money. And OLX and another company were in a dogfight at that particular point of time. But loyalty won't mean that we are like the typical way. Brand loyalty, one would think is that आप कुछ points दे रहे हैं and so on and so forth, the loyalty mechanism and all. Every particular digital company has a different way to induce loyalty. At OLX, it was all about liquidity of the platform. If there are more sellers, there'll be more buyers. If there are more buyers, there'll be more sellers. So it's a virtuous cycle that started kicking. So if you had to sell, say, this table, really, really quickly, you will go to a place which is a very liquid marketplace. And thus, you would go to OLX to sell rather than any other platform. If you had to take a cab in the next 5 minutes, you might go to an Uber or Ola, depending on your city's liquidity, because you want it in the next 5 minutes. You might go on Instagram because that's where your friends and family network is, and so on and so forth. So depending on the business model that you had, the loyalty inducing methods were very different. So at OLX, we just focused on inducing a lot of liquidity, which meant getting a lot of sellers on the platform, which got a lot of buyers, and the virtuous cycle started. But at Car Deco, something else happened. Zoopy, Noise, something else has happened. So I'm like, there's not a single thing that induces brand loyalty. It's not necessarily the brand loyalty means that if I, in the traditional sense, that if you look at a brand and say, hey, I love this brand, maybe in the digitized era, like which brand does the job for me as per my need state. And that to me is like the little bit of shift of loyalty, at least in the digitized era.
Right. Um, Yatnesh, of course, I mean, I remember watching campaigns, GreenPly. Of course, I mean, I think that has been my top of recall, for the brand. But how do you stay cluttered? Of course, when you are a leader, you have a certain following, but how do you maintain that, add new customers, What is the mantra at GreenPly that has worked for you?
Okay, so my category of brand is operate not only into the consumer home but into the consumer heart also, because people carry their home in their heart. So it's a category where you have to do the lot of saliency build exercises which you remember it in terms of the communication. But beside this, so many activities we need to do, like in terms of the so for this category, it's not only this communication which we do. Beside this, so many things which we do. And the one of the white space is the consumer does not have a much awareness. Like we were talking, for buying a 1,000 rupees any digital or electronics item, consumer do the lot of search. But buying a 1 lakh rupees building material products or the any home interior product, they don't do the search. They only just see the designs and style. But there's a lot more go beside the design and style. So we have to feed them in terms of the what are the new trends are there. We have to feed them what are the materials going to happen. We have to update them, educate them where they can make it. We keep getting so many vague requests. People find something somewhere in some European side or somewhere some Italian side and they want something there. And they ask us not about our material. They ask us which applicator can do develop this piece of furniture for us. So these are the things which we keep doing it. The communication is one of the part, and there is a challenge for us in the communication also, because this is long purchase cycle. People don't buy the interiors of furniture just the 1 or 2 month decision. They take it the more than 6 month time to decide about this thing. So you have to make your communication so fun, entertaining, so that they should able to consume your brand, keep it into the top of the mind recall. Maybe or may not be they will take the feature awareness, but at least the brand saliency should remain. So it's not only communication, entire ecosystem to help and educate the consumers we need to do for this.
Can I request the people at the back to please not talk and please sit down? It's really interfering. Yeah? Okay. Um, Ajay, in a category like yours, breaking the clutter, I mean, मैंने जो देखा है, zunk free cement, I mean, all of that, I don't know how right I am, but I mean, how do you stay, away from being categorized as, in that bulk and are visible? What all do you do in that category?
So, I think when I joined the company about 6 years back, we started possibly looking at.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry, but who's talking at the back? It's really interfering. Okay.
So I think we took a little bit of a different approach. I think oftentimes we obsess too much with our problems, right? How do we stay different? How do we stay relevant? How do we kind of what media vehicles, etc. We are too obsessed with our own problems. I think there are times where you need to step back and possibly, and we are very type A people, right? Very involved and very passionate about our brands, about our categories kind of stuff. Oftentimes, I think there is merit in possibly stepping back and looking at the consumer and asking the question why. Just to give you, and I think HR people within my company had a little worry in the first 2 months, because For the first 2 months, I was asking people the question, a fairly dogged question as to why do people make homes, kind of stuff. And I actually couldn't get an answer, right? I had a sheet of paper on my table. I had 20 reasons not to make a home, and one reason, I couldn't find a single reason which could go beyond a second conversation why people would make a home, kind of stuff. So I think oftentimes, if we get to, and these are these are age-old problems for marketers.
Old age के लिए हमदर्द.
No, I'm not so sure I'd classify that, but that's
just
that's
kidding.
another conversation. But I think stepping back, if you ask and spend enough time, because we think of consumers as consumers of cement, of consumers of Hamdard, or he's a buyer of consumer. We think of them, that term, I actually viscerally hate that term consumer, because we are talking to people, right? Understanding their context, understanding why they are doing something, understanding the jobs to be done that they have unfulfilled, and they might not be able to articulate it really well. But understanding their context and figuring that out, if you do that, I think then your job is far easier, right? Not many people would possibly, I don't know, very many people, because this is a metro audience, don't get as close to cement and don't understand. And most people believe UltraTech is a B2B brand. We are, I think last year we finished at about 63,000 crores. 70% of that is B2C, of people, individual people making their own homes. Now, once we had reams and reams of research which talked about why people make homes. There was talk about financial stability, financial security. I make it for my kids. I make it because I can't put together a nail in my wall. We had all kinds of stated reasons which reputed research agencies had put together, because we were asking a certain amount of questions, certain question to consumers. And because consumers want to be logical, they give you a certain answer. But if you step back and understood their context as to why, first of all, a 35-year-old person, why first it has shifted from, in a generation, it has shifted from a retirement project to a project that a 35-year-old undertakes. Why, if I read all the business press, they would say people are experiential, they don't like to own something, subscription economy, and all that I think we'd hear. Why a person like this would go ahead, get into a complicated project which they don't have the money, they don't have the expertise, they don't have. I think once you get to the core of trying to solve
understand
their
the why
problem,
of their
trying to solve
mindset.
their problem rather
Right.
than solving our problems.
Right.
We get too obsessed with our categories that we've got to sell this much and so on. And once you turn the tables onto that, I think it actually becomes easier.
Right. So really going out, taking pains to understand why people are behaving in a certain way, what is driving the behavior, that really helps. That's essentially what you're trying to say, right? Right.
First is,
Yeah.
I think first is, most times when we even go out as marketers, we go out and very frankly, the first thing that we attack consumers with, talking about our own category,
perception
right?
of,
Our
right.
category, per
Right.
se. I can say I've spent 6 years in cement. I don't know cement chemistry at all. I can't talk about cement more than for 5 minutes if a civil engineer were to sit across with me. And that's same with the consumer.
Right.
I think once you understand their broader context as to why somebody is making a decision the way they are.
Right. Right. Absolutely. 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 I think the emotional context has to come through, which is a marketeer's job to understand that. So while we are talking at staying away from the high clutter and building that brand loyalty, of course, there are mediums that are at work, you know. So you deploy a medium to reach out. So Sumanji, which medium has worked the most for you? Which medium is your holy grail in that sense?
I think I'll answer this question a bit differently. I think, with times, people have changed. With lockdown, people have changed. The COVID experience changed everybody. So during the COVID time, for the last 4 years, we went into huge amount of investments in the digital platform. So the brand stories, the narratives that we churned out were mostly digital first kind of things. And it was fantastic because that's when you start getting the feel of what data can do to you, how are you really laser targeting the audiences. So digital now is a very much a part of our so-called mix. But yes, like I said, when you're a traditional brand, you also don't want to give up your traditional marketing. While it's expensive, the other is inexpensive, but it's catering to the Gen Z that we really want to be talking to. So the tonality, the pitching is very different when we are on the digital part of the world. So yes, today if I were to really look at which is the mix that's working for us, it's a 60-40 on which we are working, and I'm sure in times to come it will become a 40-60. But yes, this is how it is.
Wonderful. Gaurav, regarding the channel, the medium that you choose, what is working? Where are you placing your bets mostly?
So, Ruhail, I think so. Media fragmentation, consumer, I won't say disloyalty, but consumers not sticking to a particular platform in the recent past has become like the whole media selection an arduous task. The second thing is that there's no common currency across all the mediums. So you can't even measure A versus B versus C and the news mediums all together at once. Having said that, I think depending on the need state of your business and the life stage of your business, different mediums work really well. Like right now for noise, marketplace, which is your Amazons and Flipkarts, the retail media, the e-tail media is a very big factor in how we have grown this category. But when I was at OLX, we had to induce this category. We had to establish this category, which is where TV became like huge for me. And so it depends on what kind of life stage your product and your category is at. But if you were to say that with all the 3-4 different startup experiences that I've had, while people do talk about that the linear TV is going down, and it is going down in numbers, in some shape or form, if you have to build like base effects, if you have to build like long-term tendencies, I think linear TV has always worked regardless of the life stages of the company. But you might use it lesser or more depending on what you want to do. But that's been one constant. And any marketing medium will give you some throughput. But I'm actually basing my argument on the base that what gives you sustained base effects. And that's why maybe one of the common denominators across the 3-4 experiences with startups has been linear TV. But yeah, as your business demands, you go over index or under index.
Depends on the life cycle of the business, and that's how you choose it, right? Essentially. Yatnesh, what has worked for you the most that has built the top recall for the brand?
So the TV communication is the one which the outside world sees, and everyone see the brand is more visible, more entertaining, fun, and very good commercial doing. So everyone prays for this thing. But inside what we know, it is a product experience, a perspective of the product experience. What the customer shares, that works for the brand. So this is the one way he consume the story, he bring this consideration for the brand. But what make him to go toward the brand, that is the perspective of the experience. So that flows through either through the digital or through the influencer or the applicators. Once they share about this product experience, that's make the customer to take some call toward this thing. But yeah, the most obvious one or the most prominent one which give me the top of the mind recall for the brand in the audience mind is the television, or maybe the video storytelling through the television or through the other digital media.
Ajay, before I come to you, I just want to make a small announcement. There was a gentleman who asked me that why don't you let audience ask a question? I will after Ajay. I'll definitely come there because so many thought leaders on that side. I would definitely like to get two questions. But Ajay, of course, newspaper I have seen a lot of UltraTech. But what has worked for you? Which genres, which mediums have delivered the most for you? Which mediums and genres do you swear by at UltraTech?
If I were to take a little bit of your language, it's like asking what medicine works, right? And if you do that and ask that to a doctor or go to a chemist and ask that, he will turn around and ask the obvious question, कि आपको बीमारी क्या है, right? What are you trying to treat? Now, you have a certain context of what you're trying to achieve. We had, at one place of our time, we decided what is the problem we're trying to solve for the brand. We had over close to, for among home builders, about 98 odd percent salience in terms of awareness. We had 8 out of 10 people saying that they consider the brand when they're trying to purchase. The problem that we were trying to put together in a category where it's not a low involvement category, it's a very high involvement category. In fact, people spend as much time thinking about how to build as much they spend about building and spending time in construction. Our task was being the number one brand, and it's a different category. Most times the number one brand typically is the lowest common denominator, right? Pricing is by par. Our category is where we are number one and we also are a premium player, right? So you defined your task as to, the task is to generate preference rather than anything else, right? That's the brand task. Second piece, like I said, it's a fact, while there's a lot of talk of data and big data and AI and all of that stuff, there was a simple insight that was sitting on the nose, and everybody maybe knew, didn't know, but it was just obvious sitting on the nose that here's a fellow at 35, he's trying to build his home, okay? For that fellow, he does not know, leave aside the answers, he doesn't even know the questions, right? So he would go to his neighbor, how did you build, right? He'd go to his friend, family, he'd go to the mason contractor, he'd go to the dealer, he'll ask nearly 20 people how to build. Now, there's a question of trust, there's a question of expertise, and both are not found at the same place in our category. So, I think we use digital in that particular scenario. We use TV for a very different reason of trying to build preference, like Maruti taught people, right? How do you choose cars, right? We all know the phrase. We are teaching, and we've taught the category, why spend money on structural bit, why spend money on buying the most premium cement, because how many times do you build the home, right? It can't go wrong. It's a reversible game.
Awareness, basically. Building that awareness.
It's
part,
framing
right?
the question for the category, right?
Right.
You are defining, not just saying that I'm better than the rest of the brands of cement, you are defining the playing field itself, right? If I have to beat Messi, I'd rather play cricket with him, right? If I define the playing field, that's how I win, right? And once we frame, and Maruti defined that mileage was how you choose cars. We are defining why you choose India's number one brand and the most popular brand and the most recommended by architects, engineers, because you can't go wrong in this game. Digital we've said that there is no checklist in a process where it is akin to a process of marriage or getting your father's heart operated, right? You can't go wrong. And if you go wrong, the cost of doing that is very, very large. If you go through our social channels, we don't use them for advertising. Our social channels talk about how to build a home and how do you are just hand-holding and navigating the person in terms of going beyond. And we barely talk about cement. Now, our task there, we define the task for ourselves as a strategic task of becoming a thought leader and helping the consumer in the task that he wanted to do.
No, I got it. Absolutely. Let me go to the other side of the panel. Anyone has a question? Here is your chance. Okay. I did my fair share of asking you. Great.
I just wanted to add one more thing, that while we spoke a lot about TV and digital, in my business, we also run clinics. You know, the Hamdard clinics, which has Hakims, and prescriptive medicines are sold only when a Hakim has prescribed it. Now, this is not something that we do as a television or a print ad campaigns. So we do a lot of on-ground promotions, and they are fantastic. They are closest to my heart because, you know, when you set an objective that you need to have increased walk-ins, you need to have connect with the consumers, and it's also a great way of judging the brand love. So we do a lot of work in that sphere, and I think that's one of the most exciting part of the job that I do, because I feel that this is when you are so in front of the consumers and you know exactly, you can feel their pulse for the brand.
It's a fascinating example because oftentimes we treat our budgets and our mediums as stuff that we have to shell out money for. UltraTech prints 150 crore, more than the number of Indians that are there, 150 crore bags, right? That's visibility for me. If that talks the right proposition, rather than just looking pretty, right? One thing for packaging is just to look pretty.
The vanity metrics.
Yeah. One thing is, if it talks your proposition, that's a medium.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Maybe the applicators also, like his category, or maybe what she's saying about the clinic through the prescriptor, those things. Same way in the other category also, those applicators, because they bring it forward, what the brand is going to deliver. Because consumer has generally the dream or the aspiration of the what is the house or what the product is looking, but to bridge the path, or to give him that path, so that this is from this brand and this product, or you are going to meet this dream.
Right.
They also play the important role.
I have time for two more questions. Let me, you know, when you run a campaign, when you run a marketing initiative, when do you decide the time to revisit it? I mean, how do you decide? How do you go out and listen, do that listening part of it? I mean, I just want to understand that part.
Like I said, a medicine is never out of fashion. Just like diseases don't disappear, or ailments don't disappear, we are always in business. But we also have certain OTC products, like, you know, the Safi and whatever, Rogan Badam, Shireen, Jushina, they all have a seasonal cue. So the moment you have a seasonal skew to certain products, you know exactly that just pre-monsoon, you know, your skin gets into eruptions, so you need to have a blood purification story to do. So there are seasonality for all the products of the OTC kind, but where the medicines are concerned, there is certainly no timing for it. We just decide which are the products that we are gunning for, and we need to promote them. So you find, like you mentioned, that you see a lot of ads in Urdu newspapers. So those are there. And otherwise, for the main big campaigns, we do come back once a year for sure. And digitally, we are present almost every 24/7. Yeah.
Gaurav, you don't have seasonality to this, so how do you, even if you're running a campaign and you want to now have a version 2, so I mean, when does it expire and when do you decide that now is the time? How do you decide that part? And how often does that happen?
Just to get the question right, are you talking about the media choices or
No,
maybe
the campaign
the messaging?
expiry date? How do you know that this campaign has expired and now, because you must be getting some cues somewhere. So how does that bit work?
So, I mean, like, you know, digital is a 365 understanding of what's happening and how to stop, when to stop, pause, or accelerate. So that happens on a daily basis. The TV or the offline campaigns, because the data keeps on flowing in on a secondary basis, we are analyzing campaigns on a daily basis. So there are a lot of times when a new campaign doesn't do well and you have to like, take a corrective action within like say a week of launching the campaign. It might be the content of the campaign or it might be the media vehicles that you're choosing to deploy. Then Ruhail, there's like a post facto analysis, which is where you would do your media mix model and so on and so forth to understand the next campaign, even if you're running the same content again, how would you actually take it to the market? Maybe it will be the same, maybe it will be about 20-30% different from what you deployed earlier. So, and then that's maybe the advantage and the curse of being in a digital business. You have to be agile because you have the necessary information and insights coming to you very, very rapidly. So being a growth professional in a digital company, I mean, like, it's not that it's a digital campaign and it's an offline campaign. So offline ko 30 दिन बाद देखेंगे या 60 दिन बाद देखेंगे and then we assess. It happens on a daily basis. So even like a big TV campaign, you're looking at, I'm like on a 4-hourly basis, server pe kya pings ho rahe hain, everything. So, and then you take corrective actions.
No, I have a slightly different point of view on that and on this stuff. To me, I think a lot of marketing is what is called marketing is masqueraded, whatever sales per se, right?
I request you to keep it closer.
Sorry. Yeah, it's what masquerades as sales aid kind of stuff. I'm not so sure if we've got to talk about mental availability of stuff, if you've got to establish something in people's heads, I think constant tweaks at that frequency make sense per se. Because if you are treating the only dial as, am I switching on the tap and does the water flow increase or low? Yeah, that's one. That's only I think, small part of the.
No, I never mentioned the sales bit. I mean, even if I'm looking at my top of mind awareness matrix, I'm like, there are ways by which we can track that fairly rapidly. And because of the models that we'll make, we'll have a fairly good understanding at what point does it start to give me some green shoots. So maybe it's a 7-day post that I need to look at what those green shoots and then I press or pause. Not pause or change.
Right.
So not only about sales, but even like, say brand building or top of mind awareness matrix. I think there are enough and more models that we can track fairly
And there's
rapidly.
also a category, different categories at play and different go-to first platforms like digital is your
I'm
go-to.
not so sure. I'm actually not so sure about that, because I think people who are consuming her category or his category, or I think either one of our categories, we are finally talking to human beings, right? If today I told you my name was Ajay and tomorrow I told you my name was Vijay and third day I shifted my name was something else, I think in a very cluttered space where somebody has a bad mother-in-law, somebody has EMIs to pay, somebody has a crying kid, in that clutter, if we have got to deposit mean something to people, a very rapid change and lack of consistency
Go against it.
goes against building long-term mental availability, right?
Right.
Can
So,
I just-
yeah, sorry,
Sure.
please. Yeah.
Sure. We have just
I
just have 1 minute.
I just wanted to bring in one human element. Like in Hamdard, we always say that we are one company that contributes to nation building, because Hamdard is a trust and it gives away 80% of its profits to charity. Now, when you have that stature, sometimes it helps to tap into the time, the moment marketing and really make it big. So we did something which was absolutely loved by the world and we ourselves love it. It's post the second COVID, we ran a campaign, the master idea of the campaign being Sehat hai to Watan hai. And I think that was so ownable by a company whose mission is to provide affordable medicines for all and see a healthy India. So this campaign that we ran was so emotive, it was so powerful in its emotion. I think we connected a lot at the grassroots level with people, and we went all out to give 75% off on MRPs to people who were buying the medicines, and it was for the keepers of the nation as well.
Right.
So that was a very, very different way of looking at it. It had nothing to do with sales, it had nothing to do with anything, but it was just, building on the love of people, love of the company, for the medicines that it wants to reach out to people. So it was a very large thought.
And I actually think that's a fairly beautiful example of, I think, carrying on an arc, which carries on maybe for decades, right? You stick on for a theme for decades. What you might have a manifestation of, you might need to change, tweak things from a day-to-day basis, depending upon what's current and what's the context.
I'm sorry,
and
I
what's
have to
the-
intervene.
sorry.
Just last comment I'll take from Yatnesh, from you. Around the campaigns, how often do you tweak them? When do you get the cue that now is the time to put in? Because also, I mean, how does it work in your case, in your category?
No, I think we also belong to the category which is a very planned purchase category. So we try to stick, we try to be the consistent. There is a change of the content or the medium based on to the what kind of the sentiments we are getting it. But we generally try to stick for a little time, not to try to make it so fast thing. And as he mentioned, we also see them as a more as a human and as more as a what the context they are trying to consume it, rather than just the certain researches or certain sentiments coming and then trying to decode the creative rather than trying to decode the overall the campaign messaging.
Right. I wish we had more time, but we are really out of time. Thank you everyone for sharing your insights on this panel, and thanks Ajay and Yatnesh and Gaurav and Suman ji for your time. Thanks.